Earlier this month, Governor Henry McMaster signed into law a bill allowing death row inmates to elect execution by electric chair or firing squad if lethal injection drugs are not available. Here to help us better understand this side of the law is our legal contributor, David Hoffman, founder of Hoffman Law Group. And a lot of people think this is going back in time, that it sounds barbaric. Maybe you could tell us why firing squad has made a comeback here in this part of the world.
Here in South Carolina?
Yeah.
Well, it actually has only made a comeback in about 3 or 4 states. It's actually not making a comeback in any European country, in Asian countries. This is a new South Carolina thing. The death penalty, it used to be done by counties, right? In the early 1900s, if you were sentenced to death, you would be hung in whatever particular county. In around 1912, that's when we introduced the electric chair for state death row inmates. And it kind of started with that. And then, decades later, lethal injection came along. And there's so much to discuss with each of these aspects. So here's where it's come up lately. South Carolina's had a lot of trouble getting the drugs required for lethal injection. So when they say if lethal injection's not available, you can choose firing squad or electric chair, that's not being really upfront. We know that the drugs are harder and harder to come by. South Carolina's drug supply for lethal injection expired in 2013. So we haven't had it for quite a while. There's not been an execution in South Carolina in 10 years. And it's because of the lethal injection drug. So for a politician to come along and say, well, we're going to give you a choice if they're not available. Well,
So
no,
is
they're not available.
Executions, do you think?
I'm sorry?
Is this going to speed up execution?
I think that's why they're doing it, is that there are approximately 37 people on death row right now, 3 of whom all of their appeals have run out. So we have 3 people on death row in South Carolina right now who are up for execution, but we can't get the drugs. So again, this is a matter of methodology. They're all fairly gruesome. It's just, I think it comes down to, are you for the death penalty or not? Which brings up the irony that a week or so ago, we aired a segment, you and I, on the changing the abortion rule to 8 weeks because every life matters, right? Well, every life matters. Then the state turns right around and we make it easier to kill people.
Well, and with all due respect, I think there's a big difference between abortion and someone who's sitting on death row.
And of course, I understand that distinction.
I know you do. But this is actually a good place to take a break. We do need to pause here. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. Want to also talk about just what the process does to the psyche of the person who's administering the execution. So let's talk about that a little bit too. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We're here with David Hoffman. We've been talking about the new law that was signed, the new bill that was signed into law. Governor McMaster has now made it legal for inmates to choose between electrocution and death by firing squad for death row inmates. Now, the lethal injection drugs required to carry out these executions are in very short supply, not only here in South Carolina, but elsewhere in the country.
Worldwide.
And so this would essentially speed up executions here in South Carolina. What do you think this holds for this country and in the state? Do we continue to administer executions? Do you think that there will be a time when there is no such thing?
I can only speak as far as the current status of the law, and the Supreme Court has never ruled, the Supreme Court of the United States has never ruled that that executions are unconstitutional. In other words, that they do not violate the cruel and unusual punishment portion of the Constitution. So the Supreme Court has never said one way or the other. What they have done is they have found South Carolina's death penalty statute unconstitutional more than once. So now South Carolina is kind of following more of a guideline where you have two phases of a trial. You have the guilt phase, and then you have the penalty phase. They are bifurcated. There's two parts of a capital trial now. Back in the day, it used to be that if the jury or the judge just didn't recommend mercy, you automatically got the death penalty. So then South Carolina, the Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional because it was too arbitrary. So then South Carolina just turned it and made it mandatory. Well, if you get convicted of XYZ capital crime, you automatically get the death penalty. Well, the Supreme Court, 3 years after that came out, Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional. So where will it be? There are a lot of opponents to the death penalty. There are a lot of opponents. I don't know how I feel about it. I know that I've read stories of some people who just seem like their entire purpose on life was to eventually get the death penalty. Some of the horrible things that they've done to people, but at the same time, Leyla, you cannot overlook how it has been applied. Historically, if you are a minority or if you are poor, you are far more likely to get the death penalty in a capital crime. So I don't think that I think you have to look at it as a big picture kind of thing instead of just, certain crimes you need the death penalty. It's being administered to some, and people with similar or worse crimes are being spared. So I think you have to look at it. I think you have to look at the death penalty as more of a cerebral approach than a philosophical, I think people who do horrible crimes should be put to death. Problem is that's not always what's happening.
Right.
So how's that for a long-winded non-answer to your question?
I think it's perfect. And I think it's a great way to end this segment. I think I'm done talking about this subject for a while. I want to thank you so much for getting me there.
Yeah, can we do something like Teletubbies debate or something next time?
Let's do that next week, shall we?
Something a little less morbid.
Appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
We're back after this.